Hello everyone, myself Shubham Raturi, one of the faculty of Indian Economy here at Vajiram and Ravi. Now today we are going to discuss a very small topic, or rather a brief of inflation. Now if we start discussing inflation properly in a holistic 360-degree view, a detailed elaboration on this topic can range for 1 or 2 classes. But the point is here we are going to be very brief. Now still, let me tell you what are the topics that we should take into consideration whenever we are preparing it for, especially for UPSC. So for inflation, we have to start with very basics of inflation, in the sense to get the idea of what inflation is and then how it is related to our common lives, in the sense what it is and what it is not. We also should have a sense of how inflation is related to the monetary policy. Now, this will give us a basics of inflation to start with. Now, once we are done with the basics, or once we know what it is and what it is not, then we can go to the factors which are causing or is leading to this phenomena called inflation. So there can be various factors. Some of the factors which we identify are demand side factors. Some of the factors which we identify are the supply side factor. Some of the factors which we specially identify are sometimes called as structural factors, which are acting in long term. And then there are other factors which cannot be categorized directly in these buckets of demand side, supply side, or structural. So for example, expectations, how people make expectations and how expectation is changing the economic behavior is also impacting inflation. For example, if there is inflow of foreign investment, it can also impact inflation. So it can also be one of the factors causing inflation. Or for example, if suppose some of the developed countries, especially the developed countries which have a huge economic heft in the world economic order like US, if they take certain kind of policy actions, especially the monetary policy actions, that can lead to inflation in India. So the point is, if we have to look into the various factors of inflation, it can be divided into various groups. So once we are thorough with the basics of inflation, we can go to the factors which are causing inflation. Now, once we know that what are the factors causing inflation, then we should also prepare ourselves for the various concepts which are associated with inflation. Means they are somewhere related, and rather sometimes a derived form of the inflation, or inflation happening in a bit different way. For example, there is something called inflation that we know and that we usually prepare for UPSC, but there is also something called deflation. There is also something called disinflation. So what these two are and how they are different from inflation, that is also something we should be ready to prepare with. Then what is something called stagflation? What is greedflation? What is shrinkflation, skimflation? All of these terms are there which are somewhere associated with inflation, or sometimes a derived or a changed form of inflation. Now, once we are done with the associated concept of inflation, then we should also prepare ourselves that how the inflation is impacting the different economic agent in the economy. So, for example, we all, people like you and me, we all are the economic agent. And we are influenced, or economic behavior is influenced by various macroeconomic variables. Now, one of the macroeconomic variables that is impacting our economic behavior is inflation. So, for example, sometimes we are acting as creditors, that is, we are lending money to people. Sometimes we are acting as debtor, that is, we are borrowing money from someone. Sometimes we are simply having the fixed salary. Sometimes our salary is getting adjusted or indexed with increase in prices or inflation in the economy. Sometimes we are acting as an investor. Sometimes we are acting as a saver. So the point is, we are playing different roles in the economy. So how we are getting impacted from various economic variables, and especially so here with inflation, that is something we should be ready to deal with. Then once we are thorough with these basics, like what inflation is not, what are the factors causing inflation and various kind of factors, what are the various associated concepts with the inflation, and then what are the impacts of inflation or impact of inflation on different economic agent, then we should also know that how inflation is actually measured in India. And if you are following the newspapers, you must be knowing and you must have read about the various indices which are associated with inflation. And the most common is the CPI, especially the CPI combined form. That is CPI combined, which is usually seen as a target, or rather is targeted by RBI for flexible inflation targeting regime. So we know RBI in India is the monetary policy authority of the country, and it has a legal mandate under the monetary policy framework agreement between the government of India and the RBI that they have to maintain inflation within a range bound. That is 4 plus minus 2. 4 minus 2 and 4 plus 2. That is 4 minus 2, 2, to 4 plus 2 to 6. So 2 to 6. That is the range that they have to maintain inflation in. So that inflation of 2 to 6 is measured through CPIC, CPI combined. So we should be thorough with what CPIC is, what its baskets look like, and what are the factors which can impact its basket. Then we should also know about something called WPI, Wholesale Producer Index. That is how the inflation is measured at the wholesale level of the supply chain. Then there is another kind of index which still not have come in India, but is being proposed for a long time now, for more than a decade, and that is PPI, that is Producer Price Index. And then there is another sort of inflation measurement index that is the broadest one, but may not be very much accurate for the consumer level inflation, and that is GDP deflator. So when we prepare inflation, we should also be thorough with these kind of topics like CPI, WPI, PPI, GDP deflator, what they are, what is their concepts, what are some of the facts associated with them, what are the agencies associated with their publication, how frequently they are being released, whether they are updated or not. All of these things also come within the concepts associated with inflation. And then finally, if you know what inflation is and how it is measured in India, we should also be able to know that how it can be managed. So inflation management is another topic that comes within the topic of inflation that has to be prepared thoroughly. And then finally, we should know the relationship of the inflation with other variables, and especially the relationship of inflation with unemployment rate. And that is something what Phillips curve tells us. So we should know that what Phillips curve is, how the inflation is related to the unemployment rate, and whether the inflation management as such has some real cost on the economy or not. So the point is, we should not only be knowing theoretically what Phillips curve is, because this is the GS paper. We should not be knowing only the theory behind the Phillips curve, but we should also know that how practically, that is how intuitively we can make sense of this Phillips curve, so that if any question directly or indirectly in the form of the statement, implicit statement is coming in the prelims, we are able to deal with it. So if you are able to cover these dimensions within inflation, that means your inflation chapter is done. So in this session, what we are going to do, we are definitely not going to take the full throttle discussion of inflation, but I'll take up the very basic facts of inflation. That is, what is inflation, how you can make sense of that. So the first subtopic, that is what I'm going to deal with in this session. So let's start with the basics of inflation. So if you see inflation as such, now in almost all the books we have studied, any kind of source which you study, and this is a kind of definition which I'm going to give you with respect to inflation, which will be accepted by all or refuted by none. So that kind of characteristics this definition has. So generally we say that inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and services in an economy. So that is the kind of definition that is usually we start with when we study about inflation. Now, the point is, if we elaborate on it, or if we do a bit of postmortem of this definition, we'll get to know many things. So let's start. We are saying that inflation is the general increase in the prices of goods and services in an economy. So whether we mean by saying that when we are saying that inflation is happening in the economy, then the price of all the goods and services should increase. That is one extreme. Or when we are saying that inflation is happening in the economy, we can make that conclusion just because the price of one of the good or service that you are consuming is increasing. So we are picking up two extremes. Whether inflation is the increase in the price of all the goods or services, or whether inflation is simply an increase in the price of one product or one good or service. The point is, both of them have certain problems. Now this kind of extreme, when we are saying that inflation can be defined as simply as an increase in the price of one good or service, will be grossly misleading. Making such kind of gross extrapolation on the basis of the price of one product or one good or service is going to be misleading. So just we are removing this possibility. Then the another one is whether inflation can be seen as an increase in the price of all the goods and services. It can be seen like that. So it's not wrong. But the point is, it is not completely correct in the sense that if any monetary policy authority has to measure the increase in the prices, or if any monetary policy authority has to take certain policy action to counteract inflation, they need an indicator which is more frequent. And if you look in India, every 2 months, the Monetary Policy Committee meeting is being scheduled, and they take certain actions so as to counter inflation. Now, at least they need certain kind of index, which is releasing at least bi-monthly. So the point is, this can be correct, but the point is it may not be too frequent. So it may not be of much of use for us, especially when we are making monetary policy decisions so as to counter the inflation. First thing. Second is, when we are saying that we are including the price of all the goods and services that are produced in the economy, then in the economy, many goods and services are produced which are many times not at all important for an average consumer. So for an economy or in GDP calculation, we also include the things like bombs or bullets. They may be important for the country, for the national security purpose, and the values included in the GDP, but there is no sense of measuring their price increase for measuring consumer level inflation. So the point is, it may be the broadest measure, but it may not be the accurate measure for an average consumer. So when we say that yes, an economy is suffering with some inflation or is facing some inflation, that is a kind of macroeconomic phenomena called price increase is happening here, then we have to be very sure about removing these two extremes. That is neither one nor all. If neither one nor all, then what? Then what we will do is that we will arrange, or we will rather frame a consumer basket. So in any economy, including in India, a consumption basket or a consumer basket or a reference basket, whatever name you may say, and all these names are used alternatively, this consumer basket is formed. And in this consumption basket or in this consumer basket, various goods and services are put. Now, each of this good or service will definitely have some price attached to it. Yes, of course. Now, on the basis of the price attached to each of this good or services, we are able to find out the cost of basket. So, we'll be able to find out the cost of basket for a reference year, that is for a base year. And over time period, as the price of the various goods and services stuffed in this basket will increase, and of course they will increase because over time period the cost of production increases, and the increased cost of production is definitely going to get translated into the higher prices of goods and services. So definitely the cost of basket will also increase. Over time period, as the prices of the various goods and services increase, and therefore the cost of basket will increase, then we can safely say that inflation is happening. The rate at which the cost of basket increases as compared to the reference of the base year, that becomes our rate of inflation. So that is how exactly on ground inflation is measured, especially the consumer level inflation. That we frame a basket, we put various goods and services in that, and then we attach the various prices attached to them, and then on the basis of the calculation we find out the cost of basket. That is how difficult or how easy it is for an average consumer to access that basket. And over time period, as the cost of the basket increases, that is over time as the accessibility of that basket becomes difficult for an average consumer, we say inflation is happening. The rate at which this process is happening means the rate at which the cost of basket is becoming higher, that becomes our rate of inflation. So this is what, and this is how inflation is exactly measured. Now the point is, what are the goods and services that we will put here? Now that is also something which has to be answered. That just now I told that various goods and services are produced in the economy which have no direct relevance or no direct resonance with the consumer. Means consumer is not consuming them directly. So what kind of goods and services we are putting it here? Now we will usually put those kind of goods and services here which are reflective of the average consumption pattern in an economy. That means we will put those goods and services which matters to the average consumer. And what matters to the average consumer changes from economy to economy. So a basket for India may be different from basket for US, or may be different from basket of China. What matters to the average consumer may change over time. So basket for India for today may be different for what the basket was 20 years earlier, or what the basket will be 20 years after this time period. So the point is, over time the consumption pattern change, and therefore over time the shape and form of this basket also change, because over time some of the goods become important for us and some of the goods become not so much important, means almost trivial for us. So we start reducing their consumption. Okay, so the point is, the consumption basket will reflect the different kind of changes from economy to economy. It will reflect different kind of changes over time, means intertemporally. Then also the consumption basket may change from rural India to urban India. So for example, I mentioned in the introduction section that there is something called CPI, Consumer Price Index. Now I gave the example of CPI combined, which is targeted by RBI for inflation management. But there is also called CPI rural and CPI urban. CPI rural gives us the measure of inflation for rural Indian, and urban for the measurement of inflation for an average urban Indian. Now the point is, different kind of rural and urban setting will definitely get translated in different kind of consumption pattern, and therefore the person rural India may have a different kind of consumption pattern from the person in urban India. So the point is, the consumption basket may also be different, and consumption basket is actually different for rural and urban India. So when we put various goods and services here, we have to be very much sure, or we have to be very much aware of the thing, or we must appreciate that thing, that what is consumed by a person in one country may not be consumed by a person in another country. What is consumed by a person in a society may not be consumed by a person in another society. For example, difference between rural and urban. What is consumed by a person today may not be consumed by a person tomorrow. And therefore, this basket is quite dynamic. It is not static. Now, the next thing that we should be very clear about in the section of the basics of inflation, that you are saying that put various goods and services here. And you are saying put those goods and services which are reflective of the average consumption pattern in an economy. But the point is, how I as a policy maker will come to know what is the average consumption pattern of my economy. So the point is, I'll come to know it by or through a survey. So usually a survey is conducted. This is conducted in almost all the countries wherever the inflation is managed or measured properly, and it is conducted even in India. So over time period means frequently and usually after every 5 years, a survey called Household Consumer Expenditure Survey, HCES survey, is conducted. The latest survey was conducted in 23-24. Okay, so usually it is conducted after every 5 years. This time it took around 10 years because there was some kind of controversies related to the data quality issues in the 2017 survey. So the survey was conducted in 2012, it was conducted in 2017, but the numbers were not released because of data quality issues. And then again it was conducted in 23-24. So right now we have the survey result of 23-24. So definitely if we have the latest survey result, we know what people are usually consuming, because this survey, which is called Household Consumer Expenditure Survey, gives us two critical information for inflation measurement. Now it gives us, or it tells us, that what people are consuming means how much people are spending on various kind of consumption. That is, to use the more accurate term which has been used in the survey, which is used usually in such kind of survey, that what is monthly per capita expenditure, that on average, what is the per person expenditure done by a person, and then where all they are spending. That is, what is the composition of expenditure. So how much I am spending and where all I am spending. Now these two information are good enough or sufficient enough for me to get the idea of what is the consumption pattern of people in an economy. And this kind of critical information can be used by me to frame this basket, to stuff this basket. So for example, for an average consumer, if I know that food is important, food definitely will be there. And if I know food is almost forming 50% of the consumption expenditure of the people, that is, if they are spending 100 rupees in a month, 50 rupees they are spending on meeting their dietary needs, means food and beverages. So I will put food here and I'll give 50% weightage to the food. That is how the consumption basket is framed. So I just now refer to SCES survey, Household Consumer Expenditure Survey. And I told you that the recent one is being done in 23-24. Now the point is, this survey can be used for inflation measurement, for the adjustment or the changes in the consumption basket. But this survey or the survey result can also be used for many other things. And this is something which is being discussed right now. If you read newspapers properly, you'll be able to know that people are relating it to the consumption inequality. That is, it can be used for inequality measurement. It can also be used for the poverty measurement. So this survey is going to be critical one and will be under discussion for some years to come, because it has ramification or implications for inflation and inflation measurement, yes, but even for inequality measurement and poverty measurement in India. And especially poverty measurement or poverty figures are not been updated for quite some time since Tendulkar Committee's report in India. So it's going to be under discussion. Now, let's again come back to the inflation. Now, if you see, inflation as such, yes, we know it is measured like this, practically measured like this. So I'm just giving you a broad outline. How exactly it will be measured? We will discuss those things when we discuss the subtopic of inflation measurement in India. So this is how broadly the inflation is measured. Now, there is also one thing that is associated with inflation, and that is that inflation has implication for the purchasing power. That means, if the price of the various goods and services increases, means if the overall aggregate average price in the economy increases, that means if inflation is happening in the economy, that can also be simultaneously interpreted as the reduction in purchasing power of our currency. Now I'll take a very simple example. Let's suppose I take the example of this water bottle. Okay. Now let's suppose the price of this water bottle today is 10 rupees. Now let's suppose over time period, the cost of production of this water bottle is increasing, and therefore by next year, a bit of wild guess, wild assumption that the price of the water bottle has doubled. That is, it has increased from 10 to 20. Now, this is definitely or can be seen as the increase in the prices of water bottle in one sense. And if you are looking at it like this, we are not wrong. We are completely right. But there is also another way to see this increase in prices. And that is how I will be able to relate inflation and purchasing power of the currency, what I am trying to tell you. So for example, today I pay 10 rupees and get access of this water bottle, get hold of this water bottle. Now tomorrow if I have to get this water bottle, means next year if I have to get this water bottle after price increase, I have to pay double the amount. That is 20 rupees to get hold of this water bottle. So the point is, in one way, it can be seen simply as an increase in the price of water bottle. In another way, it can be seen that there is nothing that is changing in this water bottle. Water bottle is same. It is still the bottle with the water only. But what is changing here? Means the change is in the power of my currency. Earlier, I was paying a single 10 rupee note to access this water bottle. Now I am paying twice the money to access the same water bottle. Means the power of my currency, the value of my currency is depreciating. It is going down. That is how you can relate inflation with purchasing power of the currency. That means as inflation increases, purchasing power of your currency or purchasing power of the cash that you are holding depreciate. It erodes. It goes down. So inflation is very much related to purchasing power of a currency. And sometimes, generally, we usually call it a name. And we say, can't be seen as a tax. Yes, it can be. So it's a kind of inflation tax. Means at the end of the day, the purpose of the tax, apart from many other, is to reduce your purchasing power. You earn 100 rupees, 10 rupees is taken by the government in the form of tax. Your purchasing power depends on 90 rupees. Again, you earn 100 rupees, prices of the goods and services that you consume have increased by 10%. Again, purchasing power has gone down by 10%. So the point is, this kind of process can also be seen as a tax. So the inflation is having implication for purchasing power, and sometimes it is called as inflation tax. Now, if you are thorough with all these things, let's see the last concept within the basics of inflation, and that is how inflation is connected with money supply. So we are looking into the relationship of inflation or prices with money supply. Definitely from the general understanding we know, and if you are following the newspapers, we know that if there is a lot of money supply that is flowing in the economy, or rather, if the money supply rate is increasing in the economy, it has all the potential to lead to the increase in the prices. Now, whether it is leading to increase in price or not, that will very much be circumstantial. And that is what we are going to see here. That is, increase in the money supply has a potential to increase the prices or the potential to increase the inflation in the economy. Whether it is leading or not, that is circumstantial, that is contextual. Let's see. See, let's suppose that this is an economy, and I'm taking this ball as an economy. And let's suppose, and we know that there are various goods and services that are produced in the economy, but for simplification purpose, let's suppose there are only 10 goods that are produced in this economy. Only 10 goods. Now, if we have to facilitate the transaction, these 10 goods, facilitating the transaction means, if we have to facilitate the buying and selling kind of activity in these 10 goods, we have to pump some kind of medium of exchange. And that medium of exchange, in the modern sense, is currency, that is money supply. Now, let's suppose the central bank of this country, that is, let's assume RBI, the central bank of this country, because it is the responsible authority to manage money supply in an economy. Let's suppose it decides that 100 rupees are enough to facilitate the transaction in these 10 goods. Now, just do the calculation. 10 goods and 100 rupees as money supply. The point is, we'll be able to come to the average price level or aggregate price level in the economy, and inflation is aggregate only. Now, if 10 goods are being produced and 100 rupees of money supply, we can come to know that the average price in the economy is rupees 10. Average price of each of the good is 10. Now, the point is, let's suppose RBI's mind change. Means, let's suppose they are thinking that 100 rupees are not enough, we should increase the money supply. Means, the point is whether they are thinking or they are forced to think. Because sometimes even the government wants RBI to increase the money supply, especially during the eve of election, or especially when the things are not politically that much comfortable. So they want to show something, and one of the things, if they want to show greener shoots in the economy, okay, it may be right or wrong, means it's not necessary that with increase in the money supply only everything can be managed. But the government thinks from this perspective that sometimes when the things are not going politically favorable for them, they force the RBI or they force the central bank of that country to go for expansionary monetary policy, means increase the money supply. That is what has happened in India also, and sometimes it has become controversial. That is sometimes, and rather it is right now happening in US. So Donald Trump and Jerome Powell, especially Donald Trump, is having a scathing attack on Jerome Powell, that why not you increase the money supply, means why not you reduce the federal funds rate there. So just like repo rate is here, federal funds rates are there. So why not you reduce the federal funds rate, why not you increase the money supply, why don't you go for expansionary monetary policy. So the point is, let's suppose, because of any reason, let's suppose they have increased the money supply from 100 to 200. Assuming the real production in the goods is 10 only, assuming nothing is changed in the form of the real economic activity happening on the ground, then the same thing, 10 goods being produced, 200 rupees as money supply, average price can be rupees 20. Now this is enough for us to get the idea that how money supply are related to prices. And you will see that what is happening here, when we are increasing the money supply from 100 to 200, the prices are increasing from 10 to 20. So don't you think it can be defined as a phenomena where too much of money is chasing too few, or rather the same amount of good is leading to increase in prices from 10 to 20. So the point is, inflation is very much connected to the money supply in the economy. Now, how much inflation is happening in the economy can have some kind of relationship with how much money supply is pumped in the economy. And assuming the goods production remains same, assuming the goods production is not changing, that is static on ground, means real economic activities are not getting increased, that is practically GDP is not changing much. If you simply keep on pumping the economy with increased money supply, that can have increase or in the prices or the increase in the inflation level in the economy. Now, one way in which it can be expressed is that too much of money chasing too few or the same amount of good leading to increase in the price. Now, the same phenomena can also happen in another way. For example, if money supply is not increasing, but production is going down. For example, instead of 10 goods, let's suppose 5 goods are produced. So, in the case of 10 goods, 100 rupee was money supply and therefore average price was 10. In the case of 5 goods, assuming money supply remains same, 5 goods and then 100 rupees money supply, average price will be 20. The point is, again, when the production is going down, money supply remaining same, prices are increasing. It's again telling us the same thing in a different way. Too much of money chasing too few goods leading to increase in the prices. You can see that too much of money supply, that is too much of money supply or the same amount of money supply chasing too few goods, instead of 10, they are chasing 5 goods leading to increase in prices from 10 to 20. So what we are going to get from here? Many things. First one is money supply has a relationship with the prices, first one. This relationship flows through something called the real economic activity happening on the ground. So the key takeaway is that if the economic activity is not increasing on the ground, whereas the central bank of the country is just pumping the money supply, it will actually get translated into higher prices. So how much money supply is pumped by the monetary authority of the country it has to have some relationship with how much economic activity is happening on the ground. If it is disassociated with each other, it can have implication in the form of prices, means prices can increase. So the point is how much they are increasing, means how much money supply they are increasing, and what kind of economic activity is happening on the ground, both have a relation. So when we say that why not RBI or the monetary policy authority simply can increase the money supply, they cannot increase the money supply simply, they cannot simply give more and more easy, cheaper credit to the people, because giving this has some cost, and cost is in terms of prices. That's why they have to be very wise and prudent in conducting their monetary policy, because monetary policy is connected with the prices or inflation level in the economy. So this is about the basics of inflation. Thank you.